Welcome to the Texas Truck Channel Podcast, episode 31. I'm Craig, and Brian is on a much-needed break on vacation right now, still returning from that. But I'm in Salt Lake City at the all-new Toyota Land Cruiser launch event. This is a kind of a first look. We don't get to drive it, but we do get to see it in the flesh, and we get all the specs and all the details for you. And let's just jump right into it. We're going to jump into that. And then we're also we got a bonus at the end of this podcast after I go over the Land Cruiser specs. We have the famous, in the Land Cruiser community, Kurt Williams of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum and Cruiser Outfitters. He's been on expeditions with Expedition Overland, and he's kind of in the Land Cruiser world. He's the man, and we have a special interview with him that I was very excited to get to do. They talk about not meeting your heroes. I got to meet one, and it was awesome. So that'll be after we go to Land Cruiser specs, but let's just dive right into that because that's what we care about, and that's what we're here for, and that's what we want to talk about. So let's talk about what it is, and I'll just tell you what it is, straight to it. There was a lot of predictions and guessing about what is it. Is it going to be the Prado? Is it going to be the 300 series? Is it going to be a 4Runner or a Bronco Wrangler fighter? We talked about it on a previous podcast, and well, we know what it is now. It is those that guessed that it was going to be similar to the GX550. You're right. That's really what it is. It's a rebadged GX550. Now, that's being a little bit harsh to it. It's more than just a rebadged GX550. Here's what I would like to say it is. It's a little more clear in its intentions. The GX550, it's going to be a little bit luxury. Plus, they also have an off-road edition, which is going to be nice. But the Land Cruiser model is going to be focused on just that. You don't get a third row, so that differentiates it from the GX550. It's kind of focused on just the overlanding aspect, not necessarily rock crawling, but the overlanding aspect. That's what the Land Cruiser is kind of known for before it was even popular, and that's what it's going to stick to. So that means what series is it? It's a 250 series. So it's a 250 series, which is globally known as the Prado. Across the rest of the globe, it sure looks like this will be the Land Cruiser Prado. Here it will be called the Land Cruiser. And I know you Land Cruiser loyalists, you're going to be upset that it's not. Well, that's not a real Land Cruiser. Why aren't we getting that one? We're going to get into some of that a little bit here in a minute. But let's start off the main reason, and that is the last model they made was a 2021, so it's been 3 years before it came back. It is back now, and the last one was in the $90,000 range. It was expensive, which means no one bought it, and it was also a luxury kind of boat mall cruiser, and it got big, so it was hard to take on trails. Yes, it was, you had more room for overland storage and that sort of thing, but if you actually trying to take it on tighter trails, you're going to scratch or you just couldn't take it. So this is much narrower, and that's going to help a lot with its taking it on trails. Now, what that means is, speaking of accessibility, it's going to be in the more accessible MSRP range of mid $50,000. Now, that's probably where it starts out at, but that is almost $40,000 cheaper than the outgoing model. Think about that. How often do you see a model go backwards in pricing? And I think that's a great move. Yes, it's not the 300 series. I understand. Get that out of the way. But look, if you want to spend a bunch of money for a 300 series, you can still get one in North America. It's called the LX600. Just go get that. It's fine. But this is focused more for the masses. So more people are going to be available to get this. And that's what I love about it. So it's going to actually, I think, help the Land Cruiser name because it's still a TNGA-F platform, which is the same platform the 300 series is on. It's the same platform the Tacoma's on, the Tundra, the Sequoia. But this is going to be focused more on what Land Cruisers are supposed to do, and that is long-distance travel, off-road, and this is going to be able to do it. One of the cool things about it is it comes exclusively with, so one of the other ways it differentiates between the GX550 is the GX550 comes with the 3.4-liter turbo V6. Do kind of wish we could get that, don't get me wrong, but this is going to come with a 2.4-liter four-cylinder hybrid called the iForce Max. We saw it first in the Tacoma. We've driven it in the Grand Highlander. We've driven it in RX350s previously. This is a great power plant. They've kind of got it fine-tuned now. You get the hybrid capabilities, which are actually going to help in some ways. Yeah, it does add complexity, and that's something probably some people aren't going to like, and I understand that. I totally understand it. But there's also some advantages to the hybrid aspect as well. So that's good for 326 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. Very solid numbers. That's going to allow you to tow up to 6,000 pounds, which I don't know who's got a Land Cruiser that's towing more than that. That's a lot of weight. You're talking about ATVs, no problem. You're talking about just about any camper you want to pull behind it, not going to be a problem. So one of the neat things about it is you get three different trim levels. We got to see two here. We got to see the 1958 Heritage Edition, and we got to see just the Land Cruiser trim. So the Land Cruiser trim is kind of the more upscale trim, and then there's a third one that we didn't get to see, which is going to be like a limited edition one. The first edition grade, I think is what they call it. That'll be limited to 5,000 units. But here we got the 1958 Heritage Edition, which has the round headlights, which is kind of an homage throwback to the 40 series, which I like. I think looks really good. I think the biggest controversy we're going to run into immediately with this current Land Cruiser is which grille do you want? So if you want the features that the Land Cruiser trim has, which has more than the Heritage Edition, you're going to have the square headlights, which is kind of an homage to the 60 series. I think the round ones look better. That's going to be kind of the debate, I think, in this world for a little bit. But what I love about the Heritage Edition is we kind of never really got a poverty spec packaged Land Cruiser previously. I think in the early 90s, maybe in the 80 series, you could get, cloth interior, and that was like the last time. Since then, we got leather and all the goodies in the North American market. So this Heritage Edition, you get cloth, no sunroofs, no moonroofs, a little more basic package, and I love it. It feels very durable, it feels very rugged. It's kind of like a blank slate. You can do what you want with it later on, and that's really neat, and I like that a lot. Okay, let's kind of continue on to its specs. Compared to the 200 series, a lot of people are going to be upset that, well, the 200 series is better, it was bigger, it was really well built. This is too. This new ladder frame that's based on the TNGA-F body-on-frame platform actually allows for more rigidity in its chassis compared to the 200 series. And that's because it has high-strength steel with blanking and laser welds. And compared to that 200 series, it's actually 4.4 inches narrower and 1.2 inches shorter for more approach angles and that sort of thing, and trail width. That's going to be awesome. So yeah, the 1958 grade has the iconic round LED headlights, and then the best part about both of the grills probably is that it has Toyota in the block letters spelled out on the grill. That's what we need to see. Obviously, we're going to have a video of it out on this soon, so please stay tuned for that on our YouTube channel, Texas Truck Channel. But in the meantime, try to explain it as best I can. But y'all know what I'm talking about. The Toyota block letters, not that weird T halo that's on all the Camrys and Avalons and that sort of thing, or minivans. I like the Toyota block letter, and it seems like they're doing that more and more with the trucks, and I like that theme, and I hope they continue that. As far as the dimensions of the vehicle, what's the exterior look like? Man, it's very squared off, and it resembles that old profile of old Land Cruisers. It looks like an off-road machine. It's got that classic squared off SUV look. The other thing it does, it gives you great visibility. When you're sitting in the car and looking out, you can see really good. The windows go really low, so you have a low cowl on the glasses, or on the glass, so that you can see out really well. It's not too much, you don't get too much of a fishbowl effect like the old 80 series do, but you get really good visibility, and that's really nice. The other good thing is the old Land Cruiser, the 200 series, you didn't have the greatest approach angle. You had a big front overhang, and that affected and impacted the approach. This new one, the overhang is decreased a lot, and we get a much better approach angle. We get an approach angle now of 31 degrees. So, in fact, I got some dimensions later. I'm going to go over 80 series dimensions compared to this and how that compares. It's going to be quite surprising how similar that is. Also, because it's TNGA-F, we get the multi-link rear suspension out back with coil springs, or 5-links, what we like to call it. And then you get massive brakes on the sticker. All models feature 17-inch disc brakes front and rear. And you get the trailer hitch standard on all grades for towing up to 6,000 pounds. What those 17-inch brakes mean, though, is you're not going to fit anything smaller than an 18-inch wheel. And I think that's going to be the first upgrade. We'll hear it from Kurt Williams later, the Cruiser Outfitters. That's what everybody's going to do first of this thing, is they're going to do wheels and tires and make this sucker look awesome, and it will. Moving on to the powertrain a little bit. It features a 48 horsepower electric motor that's integrated into the 8-speed transmission. And we don't have fuel economy numbers yet, but we'll get those soon. I know for sure they'll be better than the old 200 series with the 5.7 liter V8. And God rest its V8 soul, it's gone. But you are going to get better mileage, and with that hybrid boost and punch and the turbo, the 4-cylinder, you're gonna. I bet this beats the 200 series in a drag race. Maybe we'll test it on a future episode. Stay tuned for that, of course. Now, just like all Land Cruisers we've had here in the States for a long time, we get a full-time four-wheel drive system with a center locking diff. We've had center locking diffs forever. There's really nothing new there. But what is new, and we get these on the base model, the Heritage Edition, and the Land Cruiser, the upscale trim, we get a rear locker, a switchable locker that you can actually toggle and you can engage when you want it. That part is awesome, and we haven't seen that since 1999 in the 100 series. That's really big news, so really happy about that. And of course, it comes with a 2-speed transfer case for high and long range. Moving on to the actual approach angles, I want to compare these to the 80 series, because one of the things that's really neat is, and I think, and Kurt Williams gets into this in the interview, he'll talk about that later, but Toyota has really talked about the 40 series with the Heritage round grills, and they've talked about the 60 series with the block headlights. But this is, and Kurt Williams makes a good point, this is the closest thing to an 80 series we've had since the 80 series. This is probably, I know you loyalists are going to be upset that the 100 series and 200 series are gone and we're not getting the 300 series. I'm here to argue with you that this is probably the most off-road capable Land Cruiser we've had since the 80 series. And here's what I mean by that. First off, let's just start with the golden ratio. What's the golden ratio? If you've ever heard of the Land Cruiser golden ratio, that started with the 80 series, and that measured the distance of the wheelbase, the front to rear wheel. What's the distance between those two? And that was 112.2 inches. And it's maintained here. We get it again. It's exactly 112.2 inches. It maintains the Land Cruiser golden ratio. So that's number one. Number two, let's just compare height. The 80 series was 73.6 inches tall. This new Land Cruiser 250 series is 73.2 inches. So almost exactly the same. Length, total length from front bumper to rear bumper, the 80 series was 189.8 inches, and this new one is 193.7 inches. So much closer to what it used to be. And then approach angles, 34 degrees in the 80 series, which had a really high bumper. This one's 31 degrees. I mentioned that a minute ago, but that's pretty close. Departure angle, exactly the same, 22 degrees. So a lot of similarities to the old 80 series. And so those of you that are upset that this maybe not feel like a real Land Cruiser, I'm telling you, it is a real Land Cruiser. And we'll talk more in a minute whether or not that was the right move and if they should have gone a different direction. I think this is the right direction, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. Globally, well, we already talked about globally, so I'm not going to get into that. One of the things I think that's really neat is it looks to me, and we'll find out more as we go along, but it sure looks to me like it's going to have the same mounting suspension points as the Tacomas. Because of this TNGA-F platform, there's going to be a lot of shared components between, I think, 300 series, Sequoias, Tacomas, Tundras. It's going to be really neat to see once all these models come out, what does the aftermarket community do with that? What swaps are made to make things a little more capable off-road or other things? That'll be really neat to see how that is handled. So last but not least, let's just get into what this means for Toyota going forward. Why did they do this? Why this route versus the 300 series? Kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but again, they're going to sell more of these because it's in the mid $50,000 range. And of those three options we talked about, should it have been a Bronco Wrangler fighter and been more like a 40 series like an old Jeep? Maybe. More on that in a second. Should it have been the 300 series? I don't think so, because nobody bought the 200 series. And if you still want to spend that much money for a quote-unquote 300 series Land Cruiser, we still have it. Go get the LX600. It's already in the marketplace. Now, where does that leave this thing? That leaves this thing in the mid $50,000 range, and it's made in the same plant as the 4Runner. I talked to a Toyota executive last night at dinner, tried to pin him down on the Tahara and Hino plants where the 4Runner's made. Is this going to be built right alongside it? All he could tell me is, he didn't say the 4Runner was going to stop being made there, but what he did say is it's its own assembly line, but it is in the same plant, and they share a lot of parts. That's as far as I could get. It's not made in the same plant as the Land Cruiser 300 series, but it is made in Japan. All these will be made in Japan at Tahara or the Hino plants. Here's what I think that means. This is really encroaching into the space of the current 4Runner. The current 4Runner gets really close to that mid $50,000 number. Yeah, you can get them a little bit cheaper, but when you get them with this many off-road goodies, you're right there in that ballpark. And so you got to be careful. Toyota's got to be careful not to cannibalize some of its sales. Now, I think the new 4Runner, which we don't have any information on yet, it sounds to me like, and here's what the internet is saying and all the forums are talking about, I think they're probably onto something. I think that 4Runner is going to be that Bronco Wrangler fighter. And I'd be curious to see if it's still built in the same plant. I wouldn't be surprised to see that 4Runner built alongside the Tacoma down in Mexico. That would be a very interesting move because they would sell that cheaper. It would take the fight straight to Bronco and Wrangler, and they would stay just under this Land Cruiser 250 series price point. And that production plant is that way dedicated to the new Land Cruiser we're getting, and the 4Runner's opened up to maybe a different production plant with more off-road fighting capabilities and a lower price point. So that makes sense to me. That way they don't cannibalize sales. You've got if they do that, that leaves the 4Runner for the kind of the cheaper version Bronco Wrangler fighter. It leaves the Land Cruiser for that mid price point, overlanding, longer excursion, type of mode. And then it leaves the 300 series is still available in the LX600. I think it makes sense. Enough of me blabbering. Let's hear someone else blabber who is much smarter than I am and has a lot more knowledge than I, and that is Kurt Williams. I'm going to turn it over to him, and thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the other side. All right, getting ready to turn it over to the Kurt Williams interview. Before I do, just want to apologize and set the scene here. We're in the middle of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. There's other media and other press there, and they're filming the new Land Cruiser, so there's a lot of action, a lot going on. And we're in a museum with, concrete floors and walls, and it's not the best sound environment. We did our best to get decent spot out of the way of some people, but there's just not a whole lot of places there. And if we went outside, it would have been even noisier. So hope you can fight through some of the background talking and listen to what Kurt has to say. He's got a lot of fun stuff to talk about, and I sure enjoyed it. This is Craig with Texas Truck Channel, and I've got Kurt Williams with me. He's, of course, famous for a lot of different things, but one of them would be the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum, also Cruiser Outfitters. If you've owned a Land Cruiser, you know who this guy is. But for those that don't, potentially listening that maybe are not sure who Kurt Williams is, tell us a little bit about yourself if you don't mind. Just real quick.
Appreciate being on, and you're making me sound way cooler than I am. I love Land Cruisers. My foray into Land Cruisers started as a 15-year-old. I was on a mountain biking trip in Moab, Utah, as a young, down there with the Boy Scouts, and saw these old 4x4s trekking across and immediately recognized them. I'm like, oh, that's a Land Cruiser. And I had a neighbor that had one, so I kind of knew a little bit about the differences, but it's kind of at that point I decided, you know what, I'm going to buy a Land Cruiser. So my parents supporting helped me buy one at 15 with paper route money, and I mean, back in it was $1,100,
yeah,
mind
right,
you. So
right.
like they weren't worth a whole lot back in the mid '90s. Older ones you could still pick up, and that just kind of launched into this whole life of mine that's turned into kind of revolves around Land Cruisers and Toyota and Lexus vehicles at every corner of my life, and I still love it.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So okay, and just so the audience knows, we're recording at the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. We're here for the all-new Land Cruiser launch, which more details on that later. But also, real quick, I know you're obviously known a lot for this museum, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But also, we talked the other day offline about Cruiser Outfitters. Tell us a little about Cruiser Outfitters. How did that get started? And give it a little plug.
Yeah, so Cruiser Outfitters started in Salt Lake City in the early 90s, 1992, which is well before I could even drive. Didn't have a driver's license. I started working there in my after high school, college years. I've been a customer there, buying parts for this old 1968 FJ40 I had. And I soon just developed a relationship with the owner and started working there through college. And at some point, 2000, 2001, he decided, hey, I'm going to get out of this. And he went to go be an underwater dive welder, like commercial diver, like totally tangent career.
Yeah,
but he had this Cruiser Outfitters. And at the time, it was a like a full service shop. They were doing full restorations. We did tube work, fabrication, but also sold a lot of parts. And here I am, a college student at the time, and he had all these accounts with different vendors, and I took that over and started slinging parts on the internet, like kind of early pre-e-commerce days, really. I mean, there was stuff happening in the early 2000s, but nowhere near as prolific as it was. And really a lot of grassroots marketing, going to Land Cruiser events, being involved in Land Cruiser community events, trail rides, hosting trail rides, and just met a lot of amazing human beings throughout the United States and the world because of Land Cruisers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what spawned the business. So fast forward to today, we're about 15 minutes from the museum is where our location is, and there's a dozen of us there any given day, boxing up parts, shipping them all around the U.S. and North America and even internationally. And we do build some cruisers as well.
That's awesome. And so some would say a bad business model because Land Cruisers are known to be very reliable, so you don't need very many parts. But the good news with that is that means people keep them forever, and so invariably somebody needs something, right?
Yeah,
so
there's some interesting irony there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Land Cruisers, I like to think of Land Cruisers as the number 2 toughest off-road vehicle in the world. Number 1 being a rental car that usually will.
I was going to say it better be a rental car.
A rental car, they'll go places they never should.
Exactly.
No, Land Cruisers are amazing vehicles, but we've certainly seen a shot in the arm in the recent years of the resurgence of a lot of restoration happening. They've always been popular, right? Like amongst the community, but now we're seeing like even a little bigger recognition. You're seeing them at auction formats, seeing like really high values out of Bring a Trailer. So what that's doing is previous models or previous Land Cruisers that maybe wouldn't have been a resto candidate are now saying like, I'm absolutely going to restore that. So then there's a big parts demand for those. So that's a big part of it. But a good part of our business is just the things that keep them running down the road.
Right.
The boring bearing sills and gaskets, but like I'm a nerd about bearing sills and gaskets, so it works out.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. We talked about it the other day. I bought a Burfield rebuild kit, and it had everything in it. Had all the bearings I needed, and you even got choices of bearings and all that fun stuff.
Different brands.
Y'all do a great job with that. And of course, the best thing is the forums. You have to have this bearing versus that bearing, and it seems like you're smart. You just carry all of them.
Just do both. Yeah, like, I'm not gonna pick it. And the reality is, Toyota used both as well. But some get like so stuck, like, oh, it's got to be this bearing, or you're gonna fall off the road tomorrow. You know?
They act like the wheel's gonna explode.
Exactly. And there's some low quality stuff that we would certainly avoid, and we wouldn't sell if it's not something we're comfortable driving in our own Land Cruiser. We wouldn't sell it. But yeah, good brands. It's always been the key. We really try and focus on brands that Toyota used originally, Koyos and Timkens and Isons and these brands that are just well known and well recognized, and then put them together in kits and work with manufacturers and vendors, Sumo Gear and many other ARBs and known entities in the world, Dobinsons. There's so many of them I can name. 555. They're just good quality parts to keep consumers down the road. And a lot of these we sell right to Toyota dealerships as well, because some stuff has gone discontinued in the Toyota parts world. They still have a need to keep those vehicles moving too when you get into 30, 40-year-old Land Cruisers.
Right. And y'all actually stock these at the warehouse. Like, you put the kits together. It's not like a direct ship deal like a lot of others.
No. Yeah, we stock everything. We have approximately 6,500 part numbers in stock. And if you want to talk about bad business models, I think anybody would come into our shop and say, you sold 3 of those last year. It's time to free up the shelf space. But I'm kind of an emotional solution provider. So like if somebody calls and says, hey, I need this one part, I want to say like, oh yeah, I've got those. And it's a bad solution. It's a bad business model. I'm too attached to them. I think, again, if somebody were an analyst would come in and look at how we move and our fast movers versus slow movers, they'd be like, a dumpster would be a better spot to store these parts because it's just not an active business. But again, I love old parts, and there's a cachet with new old stock Land Cruiser parts. They become very valuable once they're discontinued everywhere because somebody doing a beautiful restoration wants to have original parts. So to me, there's a value in keeping those around and helping them fulfill that. And Toyota globally is seeing a value in that too. They in Japan have launched what they call the GR Heritage Parts Program.
I saw that. That's very interesting. And,
very interesting.
As a previous 80 series owner, was very happy to see that too.
Yes, and I think we'll see right now it's 40, 50, 60 series starting to dabble into 70, 80. They do other models as well, Supra, and it's interesting parts they make. We're talking like power steering pumps for a 1979 FJ40. Like,
wow.
The items they're choosing are very curated. And it's things that make the vehicle start, stop, turn, keep them on the road. And they're really trying to just help enthusiasts looking at big picture of, hey, what's missing? What hasn't the aftermarket solved? What can we do to spool up this with our manufacturers to keep these things moving down the road?
Well,
We've never seen that out of Toyota before.
No, and that's really neat. And one of the things I love about it, and I discovered with your website and of course Toyota making that news, there's a little bit of concern buying an older vehicle. Well, can I get parts? What's parts availability? And if I can even get the part, how much is it going to be? Is it going to be really expensive? If you're on the fence about a Land Cruiser and you're worried about parts availability, you just don't have to worry about it. I literally have found it easier to find parts from my old 1997 Toyota Land Cruiser versus my wife's 2016 Honda Pilot. It's unbelievable.
True story.
And so it's. I know people don't believe, but it's true and it's real. And so it's nice that there's a solve there.
And I'll touch on that just real quick. That with that Heritage Parts program, it is new for Toyota to be doing that. That's because they still have an amazing supply through their normal dealer distribution network. You can still go buy turn signals for a 1968 FJ40 at your local dealer.
That's
you know, you got to get the parts guy to kind of maybe has to get the microfiche out to like dig that up. Like this predates even the computer lookup, but their parts supply is better than most manufacturers right from there. And then add this GR Heritage and all the many amazing aftermarket reproduction and OEs that are offering to the aftermarket, and parts aren't a problem.
No, they're just not. Real quick, you talked about a lot of people are rebuilding these things now, and you're seeing the values go up on Bring Your Trailer, things like that. So people are kind of really doing this resto mod stuff. But the other thing crazy that's happened of the last few years, I don't know, 5 years ago, you'll know maybe longer than that, I'm sure, but this whole overlanding craze.
Oh yeah,
the overlanding buzzword.
Oh yeah,
it seems to be still huge, and you see that OEMs getting in on the action. They're like, all right, we want some of that with the Tacoma Trail Hunter and that sort of deal.
You bet.
The Land Cruiser returning the way it's returning, which we'll talk more about later. But did you ever think it would get this crazy? And do you see it? How long do you see this continuing?
You know, if you'd asked me that same question 5 years ago, I've been involved in the overland realm with a YouTube series we do, Expedition Overland, kind of early on. And I think if you would ask me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I said like it's cool, it's going to grow, and it's going to stay popular. That type of travel is always going to be entertaining and intriguing to those that love it. But I didn't think it would continue bringing so many new users to this whole idea of overlanding, which is in short, like vehicle-dependent travel, so trusting your vehicle. And Toyota has kind of quietly owned that whole market without. There's definitely other players in it. Don't get me wrong. There's great platforms from a lot of manufacturers, but Toyota's owned it in majority share without ever like even having to like put their name in the hat. Like they've just been there. I'll give you an example. We were at Overland Expo probably 5-6 years ago, and I've been going to that event for well over a decade now. And I was there with some Toyota personnel doing kind of a little walk around Toyota and Lexus, and Toyota wasn't there in an official presence, didn't have a booth or anything, but they're walking around like every other vendor has a Tacoma or a 4Runner or a Land Cruiser. The parking lot's full of them. That's what enthusiasts are using. But back to your question, like how long is it going to go? If you would have asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said, it's going to kind of slow up. But then pandemic happens, and that was a shot in the arm of everything outdoors and vehicles, And I think we're starting to see it kind of taper off. Maybe some that built vehicles for overlanding and travel and had remote jobs and were able to kind of work from the field are now getting called back in the office. So seeing there's, I'll say, some great deals on pre-built overland vehicles. Not crazy great deals, but decent deals. But I think it's going to continue to trend. I mean, you're here in Utah with us here at the museum. We're over 70% public lands in the state of Utah. So it's just so accessible to load up your vehicle, be it for a day, be it for a night, be it for a week or two, and come just travel and live out of your vehicle. So I think that lifestyle is going to continue, whether it keeps the name Overland or not to be determined, but I think it's going to stick around.
Yeah, because it used to be car camping or something like that, similar to that. Does the shorter excursions. I've tried to convince my wife that it's fun and we should try it, and she says, no, that can be your boys' thing. Y'all just do that yourself. So we've, myself and my brother and son, we've done several trips, sleeping in the back of our cars and stuff. And my wife says, well, did y'all have fun pretending like you were homeless in the woods? And we said, yes, we had a blast, actually.
We spend a whole lot of time to leave our comfortable homes and beds to go out and rough it. But I would say it is one of the many reasons that it has become so popular is it is approachable. Backpacking, I grew up doing a lot of camping and backpacking, and it was all about how small of gear you can have, how scarce, like what is the least amount of food I have to pack because otherwise I get carried. Well, now you've got this vehicle as your chassis, as your chariot, your horse. You don't have to pack as light. You can bring comfortable gear. You can have a rooftop tent or sleeping solutions in the vehicle. You can be comfortable. And you're seeing a lot of those amenities: onboard heater systems, onboard hot water shower systems, nice portable toilet systems that just solve some of the things that make the outdoors less enticing to some users. So that's one of the many reasons I think that it's grown in so much popularity is maybe those that came from really outdoor active lifestyles, still active and outdoor, but now they've got this vehicle to make it a little more comfortable as they get a little older or bring up their families.
Well, and the thing I've found, dabbling in it myself a little bit, it gets you off the beaten path a little further than the tourist spot is. And then if you want to go hiking from there, you can find an even more remote spot. So, like you say, it's the chariot to get you an even more remote spot, and then you can go explore even more if you want.
It's a launching pad. It doesn't have to be the end. It means the end. It's a launching pad, and that's kind of why we love these vehicles, because there's such a great, reliable way to get there.
Okay, Cruiser Outfitters, real quick, back to that.
Yep.
What series do you sell the most parts for? 40 series?
You know, it's evolving. When I first took over in 2002, January 1 to 2002, again, I'd worked there for a few years. By and large, was 40 series. The builds we did in the shop, engine conversions, upgrades, 5-speed swaps, were all 40 series. We saw 60s, but 80s were still really new at that time. And we had a few customers, but that was they'd put a lift kit on, they'd put a bumper, and they were using them off road. But you know that it's transition. We saw a big sweep of 60 series. Now the 80 series, model year 91, 97, came out in 1990. Still, all these years later, is probably one of the more popular platforms. But it's pretty even split right now between 80s, 100s, and 200s. They're all popular.
They're starting now. The 100s and 200s are coming on.
Hundreds and 100s have been jammed for quite a few years now.
Okay.
A lot of great value. Customers see a lot of good value out of those, and 200s certainly. Seen more new builds on a vehicle, far more than we ever did out of hundreds. It was less common for somebody to go buy a brand new 100 and bring it to us. I know we did some, and shops were doing it around the U.S., but it wasn't common to get a brand new Land Cruiser and the customer say, I want it all. We saw that more than ever with a 200 series. I think in part because some heard it's going away, and others just because that was the pandemic time. They understood that what a great chassis and vehicle it was. And so, but that was really interesting to see. So we still do a lot of 200 series builds, even though volume-wise, there's not a lot of them to choose from in the U.S.
There's not. Okay, last Cruiser Outfitters question. Those on the fence with an 80 series on a part-time kit, should they go for it or not?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. That is a baited question. I always say it this way. There's no right or wrong answer. We sell as many parts for the full-time TKs as we do the part-time. Most customers that do a part-time kit say, man, why didn't I do that sooner? The ability to get the front end not turning, wear and tear. I'm not going to say it does anything for mileage because I've not tested that. Some have great claims that it has. Others say it doesn't. To me, the most compelling reason would be not turning everything in your front end every day you drive. But if you are in a climate or live in an area where you maybe go from snowy roads to pavement off and on, or maybe you've got younger family members driving it that aren't comfortable with getting out and locking the hubs, stay full-time. If you like the way a vehicle handles with the back end able to maybe break loose a little bit on a dirt road, a part-time kit's a pretty fun. And everyone says, man, you're ruining, like Toyota engineered this 80 series to be full-time, you're ruining it. Well, many markets, they're part-time with the exact same axle, the exact same components. We've got a part-time, factory part-time version right over here in the museum. So we're not ruining anything they did. We're kind of actually making it like a different model they made. To be fair.
So you can't go wrong either way, really.
Can't go wrong either way.
Exactly. No, I agree. Okay, so let's go to the museum a little bit. Briefly, kind of the background on it, how it got started, who was the person kind of originally behind it, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, 100% Greg Miller. He's the founder of the museum here. Part of the Expedition 7 journey that I invite everybody to kind of read about. You can find some good information online. Part of that was going to Japan to ceremoniously receive the Land Cruisers that would then go around the world as part of the Expedition 7 journey. While in Japan, Greg sought out all the Toyota museums he could, thinking there's going to be this museum full of Land Cruisers. It's this flagship vehicle. And he found museums that had a few, and there were some here, but there wasn't one museum that represented the full line of Land Cruisers. And at the time, he had a personal collection of, maybe call it 20 to 30 personal ones, obviously a longtime Land Cruiser fan, and he sought out to change that. So it was actually on a road trip that he and I going to pick up a little BJ70 soft top up in Wyoming. We made a list like, hey, if a museum was to happen, what does it need to have to be that full to be able to properly call it a heritage museum, and
Yeah.
that list has grown even from that time. But there's 100 vehicles in the building, and 100% because Greg Miller had the vision and resources to put this together and stick with it. I mean, I think a lot of would have been easy to call it quits at 30 vehicles or 40 vehicles,
Right.
and here we're at 100, and
Yeah.
we're out of room in the building. We need the building stretcher to get some more.
The building stretcher, yeah.
It's a pretty well-rounded collection, and we feel that it's the most diverse collection of Land Cruisers in any one place in the world. There may be collectors out there that have a larger volume of Land Cruisers,
Sure.
certainly some very dedicated ones, but we don't know of anyone that's got such a diverse collection, starting with the 1953 pre-Land Cruiser all the way up into a Heritage Edition 200 series, and of course, we're fortunate to have a very new one here in the museum
right.
today as well.
That's right. So, no, and you're absolutely right. And I'll say this, I've been to a bunch of car museums, and they're all cool in their own way and very unique and fun, depending on what you're trying to see. This one's really neat because there is, you don't expect there to be this many in here, especially of one model.
Right.
And it's impressive and really neat. Speaking of those models, they all look, most of them, except for maybe the one that's rusted out, they all look very drivable. Do they ever get driven at all? Or
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do you keep up with that?
Some still do. The original intent of the museum, per Greg's kind of want and wishes, which was such a cool thought, was that if they were driving one and the museum got them, they would stay drivable.
Okay.
That was a little bit of a pipe dream, as it turns out, in that like batteries go dead,
Right.
fluids evacuate themselves.
Exactly.
So there's not a ton of money spent on trying to keep batteries charged, for example, because that's easy to switch them out.
Yeah.
But like, for example, we moved in this building a couple of years ago now from our previous location. Greg hand curated the construction and build of this new beautiful location we're in. And we moved at least 50% of them, we drove right over.
Oh, wow.
There were
Okay.
some that would have been totally drivable, but we can't drive them on public roads because they are here under an exemption that we are
Sure.
a museum to share. They're too new for U.S. roads. And there's others that we could have got running with, say, an hour of little work.
Sure.
But I would say if I were to walk around this museum, other than the ones that have been sitting for many years and are very collectible, 80-90% of these could run with very minimal effort,
Right.
or would fire right up if we put a battery in them.
Sure.
And there are a handful that are kept running because we move them in and out regularly.
Right.
So yeah, they're all mostly runners.
And that's pretty cool. I don't know, that always makes you feel a little better when I look at cars in museums. I'm like, well, this thing hasn't moved in forever. It's like, I could just see pictures of this. But when you know they could kind of actually move a little bit, I don't know, it makes you feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
And obviously not all of it would be impractical. But
There is a little sad part of that sometimes when you think about like, man, that's had so many neat adventures. But
Yeah.
I can comfort in the fact that like how much education and sharing
Yeah.
it provides by being here.
Sure.
We have patrons from around the world that come and spend time here at the museum with Dan, who's here. Dan and Jules are here regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of tours, meet guests here that have a particular model and say, can I spend an hour crawling around that one, get underneath it, see what color that bolt was supposed to be? Can we pop the hood? And we make a lot of special allowances to make that happen.
Right. So my wife has been on me for a while about renewing our vows, and I say that's silly. You don't need to do that. You only do it once. But then I told her last night, that I found the perfect venue.
Oh, love it.
Have you had any weddings here?
We have not had a wedding, and we will absolutely accommodate that,
Okay,
Craig.
I'll
Let's
tell her,
bring
all
it on.
right.
We've had parties, we've had corporate events, we've obviously had a lot of vehicle-centric launch events, training projects for different, even outside the automotive industry, banking groups that want to come have a
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
really unique place. But we're yet to do a wedding, and
Okay.
we're looking for one.
See, I'll
so,
tell her that'll be
yeah,
the first.
There we
That
go.
might be good. Okay. You mentioned the Land Cruisers because when you're 16 or you're
I was 15 years
15,
old. Yeah.
you saw them out in some trails. So what if, hypothetical, if you saw a Jeep or a Land Rover, would that have changed your whole trajectory?
No.
or?
I certainly saw those. I mean, I knew what those were. I grew up here in Utah, so my dad had an old Bronco early on and a Ford pickup truck, but I knew what they were. I found that the other part of the story is I saw this Land Cruiser I wanted, but then I kind of started shopping them in at the time it was like the local classified newspaper, the Salt Lake Tribune and Deseret News. You'd get the classifieds and crawl throughs, and I was a paper boy, so I like had early access. Like I felt I had this in that I could start looking at them before I could put them on people's porches. So I was calling on some, and interestingly, I looked at a Willys wagon. They were the old 4-door wagons, corrugated sides. It was
Awesome.
I want to say like a 50, don't quote me, 52 Willys wagon, whatever it was, and it just didn't do anything for me. And then I kept telling people that I was looking for a Land Cruiser, and here I'm this babbling little 15-year-old, and they're going like, what do you want? And it was an aunt of mine said, my brother has one of those. It's in my parents' backyard. He's in the Navy right now, and he just re-enlisted for another 3-4 years, and I know my parents want the Land Cruiser gone, so let me connect the dots. And this is like the day where you wrote a letter.
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
had to write him and wait for him
And
to
wait.
say, okay, I think
For the
I'll
new
sell the old
generation,
Land
that's called
Cruiser.
waiting.
Waiting,
You
yeah,
get
yeah.
to wait.
You don't know what this is. This is a paper letter, by the
Yeah.
way. Yeah, this is not an email, not a text. And he replied and said, yeah, I'll sell it. So that's the one I ended up buying. And
Okay.
my dad and I had to go pull it out of their backyard. Hadn't been running for 4 or 5 years because he'd been in the services. And we got it running and had it running as a 15-year-old. And that's what I drove all through high school.
And that was it.
That's it. Never ended. I've never been without a Land Cruiser in my life since that time.
Okay, so that goes to the next question. What's in the personal garage? And it's okay if they're not all Land Cruisers. It's okay, Kurt.
No, they are all Land Cruisers.
What's the daily? What's the project? What's the partners? I don't know if you have any kids, cars. What's in the garage?
My daily driver, I actually bounce between some older ones. So
Okay.
the last few weeks I've been driving a 1988 HJ61, which is a turbo diesel Japanese model Land Cruiser.
Nice.
My commute's not too far from the house to the shop. Today I'm in a 200 series.
Okay.
But my oldest, starting at the oldest, I've got a 45 series pickup truck. It's a total project, and one day I'll have the
That's
time,
the project car.
time and the money to restore that one. But it runs and drives. It's a
Okay.
Survivor FJ45 LPB long bed pickup
It's a
truck.
Survivor. I like that.
I've got a 72 FJ40 that I built when I worked at Cruiser Outfitters. So I built that in 2000, 2001.
Okay.
So I've had that one for a lot of years. It's a sprung over, removable top FJ40. Last few years I've left the top off of it all year. It stays stored inside, but have a
Sure.
lot of fun with that. I've got a couple 70 series Land Cruisers, a couple non-US imports, a BJ74 and HZJ77. I'm trying to think what else we've got around. I've got a kind of always moving a few around, but my base ones, I won't ever get rid of them. I say that I just love them to death. My wife drives a GX460.
Okay, so
Yep.
okay,
So
the Prado.
that's all. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all we are. And there's a couple other Land Cruisers. I've got a Mega Cruiser. I've got a BXD10 military Mega Cruiser licensed, and that I drive here in Utah. So
Nice.
yeah, that one's in and out of the shop. And I did indulge and signed my life away to pick up a 2021 Heritage Edition as well.
Okay.
And this is the first time I've ever told this, Craig. I haven't driven it yet. It's got 38 miles on it still.
Wow.
I mean, I got it with like 8 miles, so I've taken it to the car wash once every 2 weeks. But the plan was to sell my older 200 series, and that would fund being able to build
Sure.
the new one.
Sure.
But kind of got my eyes on something else these days. There's something new I'm kind of liking the looks of. So
Okay.
that may be getting sold one of these days.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. So, so it is possible to have a garage of just Land Cruisers.
Totally. That's all we
So
own. That's all we own. At this
Make
house.
that clear
Yeah,
for those that
yeah.
are listening and are on the fence about it. It's okay.
It is okay.
Um,
It's healthy. I tell myself that every day.
Okay, let's move on to the all new Land Cruiser. I'm not going to release this until after the embargo. Kurt Williams' thoughts on the new Land Cruiser. If you want to share that, if not, we can
Nope,
cut that out.
I'm excited. Dimension-wise, this is kind of the closest we've seen to an 80 series since the 80 series. There were a lot of Land Cruiser enthusiasts in the industry and in the market that thought that the 100 and the 200 got a little bigger than what they wanted for a trail vehicle. That certainly
Sure.
had appeal to those doing more overland travel, needed that space. The 100 and 200 are fantastic, but the 80 undoubtedly had some trail prowess that the others lacked because of its size. The solid axle certainly helped as well. We're not going to see that back anytime soon, just for
Yeah.
the user.
Sure.
We're past that, but this vehicle is very close in size to that, and so I'm really excited about that. We've also got some other additions, such as a factory rear locking differential. We've got that back, which is a
We
really
had,
cool
had that
option.
since what, 2000 in the 100 series?
You could get it in very early 100 series could have that. Just the first 2 years, 98, 99s.
Oh, 98,
And it was a
99s.
very
Okay.
limited option. Then they went
Right.
to the A-Track. A-Track's really cool,
Sure.
but for off-roaders, it's not a locker.
Like
So
to
we're
just lock
excited.
it, yeah.
We'd like to be able to push that button,
Right.
lock it. All that technology is back. It's also got multi-train select. It's got a lot of the other cool modes. Not everyone wants to use that. I get that.
Sure.
But guess what? You're not forced to use that.
Yeah, you don't have to
You don't
use it
have
if
to
it's in
use
there.
it. Don't push
Yeah.
the button if you don't want to use it. We're still full-time four-wheel drive. We're still a very stalwart chassis. We know it shares a lot of parts with the 300 series and the LX600. So, all in all, I'm very excited, and I can't wait to get out on the trail and see this vehicle in use.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You told me that the other day that it's closest to the 80 series, which is funny because all the Toyota marketing and teasing, and we've got the tease of the round headlights of the 40 series, kind of homage, and then you get the square headlights and the other trim, an homage to the 60 series. But I'm glad you brought up the 80 series similarities because that's, when I was looking at the dimensions and everything and trying to look at everything, it's like, wait a minute, this is close. Is this the most off-road capable Land Cruiser since the 80 series as far as dimensions go?
Yeah, I think
And,
it's going to be received
with the
that
rear
way.
locker and that
Yeah.
sort of deal. It's going to be awesome. And you get sway bar disconnect and the upper trims. That's a big deal for some people. Get a little more, articulation. Not that a lot of people rock crawl all these, but
Some
it's going
will.
to help in some scenarios.
Yes, some will.
I'll say one of my things I like about the Heritage Edition is we never really got poverty specs in the U.S. And I know you've climbed through it and looked at the new one. That's about the closest thing we've ever gotten to a poverty spec, is it not?
That is a lower trim, and that's kind of the trim Land Cruiser enthusiasts have been saying, Toyota, why haven't we had this trim, right? It's always hard to separate like an enthusiast, what they want versus what a new car buyer, a new Land Cruiser buyers. They're trying to sell a car, and they've done really well at it. Let's face it, they've done really, really well at it. They know what their new car buyers want. But I think now with these varied trim levels that we're seeing, we haven't seen that in Land Cruisers in many years in the United States. Like, you got this trim level. There could be a little differences. My 2008 doesn't have the rear seat heaters, but we're talking like little differences, right? Like pretty minor, center console cooler or not, but not big grade differences that we're seeing out of this new model. I think that's going to definitely excite those that want to take them and build them, because they don't necessarily want all the additional features if they know they're going to do some of their own modifications. But for those looking at a higher premium trim level, it's available. So I'm excited about that. That brings a lot, and I think that's going to kind of wake up old enthusiasts as well as new enthusiasts that come to the Land Cruiser lineup as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And kind of touch on a little bit more about the new one. It's going to start in the mid-50s, at least that base one, it sounds like. Which there's going to be, the controversy on the internet is going to be, why is it not the 300 series? Why are we not getting it? All the keyboard warriors are going to be upset. But those keyboard warriors weren't buying the 200 series. Right, let's be honest. So they weren't going to buy the 300 series. And if you still want that, you can get the LX600, can't you? I mean,
absolutely. The LX600 is an amazing trim, amazing, beautiful vehicle, all the same stalwart chassis. And one of the previous big differences between like the 200 series and the LX570 that maybe was a little bit of a detractor from the 570. It was like auto height control suspension. It was a little harder to modify. The aftermarket has jumped all over that, and people are building awesome LX 570s. But that was always a little bit of a worry on new ones. The LX 600 comes in some different trim levels. You can get one without auto height control, so that you can just bolt on a normal 300 series suspension from any one of many companies already having those on the market. So if you need that full size, well, you've also got the Sequoia that kind of fits that role for those that even need maybe a little more roll. So I think the Land Cruiser slots back into a great position. It's not the flagship as far as price now, but it didn't always need to be. That's not what it was. It was the flagship maybe for, to me, personal opinion, the off-road prowess. And I think that's what it's going to prove to do. And yeah, we're seeing the biggest price shift we've ever seen in the whole run of the Land Cruiser since 1958 here in the U.S. It's never had that big of a jump, the lower direction with the more, that mid-50s price, because we were mid-90s on the previous model. That's a big jump.
It's a huge jump. No, I think it's the right move. Obviously, better business decision, and Toyota makes more money than you and I do, so
they know what they're up to. I trust them. I don't always. My passion side says I wish we could have X, Y, and Z, but
we want it all. The passion side wants it all.
The business side of me says they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing. Okay, what's going to get the keyboard warriors fired up more? The fact that it's not that 300 series, or that it doesn't have a tailgate?
The tailgate is already ripping. It's not officially announced. Photos aren't out, but with the release of the GX550 and some of the teaser photos and the upper hatch button on the upper hatch, users are pretty aware that it's got a one-piece liftgate. That's already, there's already some that have said, oh, it's not a Land Cruiser if it doesn't have a tailgate. I don't disagree, tailgates are cool, but every 70 series ever has had a two-piece door, ambulance door. There's an Amber Alert going off.
Uh-oh.
That is wild. Sorry.
Hold on, it might go off in a minute.
No,
we're good.
But every 70 series ever made has been two-piece ambulance doors, side-by-side doors, barn doors.
Barn doors.
Were 70 series not real Land Cruisers? I mean, like all old 40 series had a liftgate hatch and little half doors. There wasn't even a tailgate. So like, where do we draw the line? We keep making these new rules that it's not a Land Cruiser unless it has a solid axle. Now it's not a Land Cruiser unless it has a tailgate. Look, I like a liftgate, one-piece liftgate, a lot more than I like a swing barn door. To me, at least the liftgate has some great utility for shade, cover, and elements. Do I wish there was a tailgate model as well? Sure, I wish there were hundreds of different models, but that's why Toyota doesn't put me in charge of choosing trims, because I need 500 trim levels to satisfy all the what-ifs I can come up with in my life.
Enthusiasts in charge, all these companies be out of business. So,
right, exactly.
Okay, so let's... because Cruiser Outfitters is going to have to get in on this new Land Cruiser at some point. What's the first mod you think people are most likely going to do to this new Land Cruiser? Is it going to be wheels and tires, or grill swap because they want the round or the square headlights?
Oh, that's a good question. I think personal opinion is going to be wheel tire because OEs are limited on what they can do. They're looking to target road noise, NVH, and EPA standards. So fuel economy is obviously massive, but never before. This is another like major awesome part about these new platforms, this new Land Cruiser platform. We have a bigger wheel opening. More accommodating is the word I'm going to use.
That's a good way to put it.
For future options than before. So I don't think it's going to take long, and it's not going to take a whole lot of work to put a bigger tire than we've ever seen easily fit into a this style of Land Cruiser before. So I think wheel tires are going to be low-hanging fruit. Like dealers are going to be jumping all over that to be able to kind of put them on the lot with a little bigger tire and a little different wheel. And the package it has on there now looks great, but you could certainly squeeze something a little bigger, a plus-size tire on there.
Right, exactly. No, I see that being the first thing as well. So, suspension parts would be carrying first.
Absolutely, yeah. And we know with the new shared platforms that all of these are working under. OE and aftermarket manufacturers, providing aftermarket manufacturers, they're already working on that. And there's a great chance that parts from, say, a 300 series could be very easily adaptable to these current models.
They're going to figure that one out quick for sure.
There'll be plenty of test fittings soon as these are available.
Absolutely. Well, Kurt, I really appreciate you giving us the time for this. Look, guys, those that have heard Kurt before on any other podcast or videos, he's as nice as he is in those in person, so it's not an act, and appreciate it. And
thank you. I
so
really
much.
appreciate it, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Kurt Williams. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to him, and he was so gracious, and he was excited to talk about it. He just wants to talk about Land Cruisers all day long. That man is not messing around. He really is that committed. I think he bleeds Land Cruisers. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to rate and like us in iTunes or on Spotify. We're still waiting for that first person to leave us some good comments so that we can get you some swag. And we also have a special Land Cruiser part that we're actually going to share for that first person that comments. It's pretty neat. It's a piece of history. I think you'll enjoy it. With that, thanks for listening. Catch you on the next one.